April 10th,
All systems green?
1945.
Affirmative, sir.
Klaus Hoffman climbed into a machine designed to kill him. The fuel could dissolve his flesh. The landing could explode his body. And the Americans, they were the least of his worries. The cockpit of the Messerschmitt 163 Comet smelled like death and chemicals. Klaus strapped himself in 21-year-old hands, shaking despite himself. Around him, 6 other pilots were doing the same. Young men, boys really, all of them about to light rockets under their seats and scream into the sky at 600 miles per hour. For 8 minutes. That was all the fuel they had. 8 minutes to climb, 8 minutes to find the enemy, 8 minutes to kill or be killed. And then, if you were lucky, if God smiled on you, if the Americans did not shoot you down, and the fuel did not eat through the tanks, and the landing skid did not catch wrong on the concrete, you glided back to Earth. If you were lucky. Klaus looked at the fuel gauges, 2 tanks. C-Stoff on the left, T-Stoff on the right. When they mixed, they ignited. Instantly, violently, no spark needed. Just chemistry and rage. The engineers called it hypergolic. The pilots called it hell in a bottle. Touch your skin, it burned through to bone. Spill it in the cockpit, you dissolved before you could scream. This was what Germany had left. Rocket planes and child soldiers, and the delusion that speed could win a war already lost. Across the runway, Klaus could see Hans Weber climbing into his own Comet. Hans, his friend since flight school. Hans who made jokes when they were terrified. Hans who last night had whispered, "This is insane, Klaus. This is suicide," and Klaus had said, "What else is there? We die for the fatherland, it is an honor." He believed it then. God help him, he believed it. The commandant's voice crackled over the radio. "All pilots, American bombers, approaching from the west. Target is Berlin. You are cleared for immediate launch, for Germany, for victory." Klaus took a breath, flipped the switches. The rocket engine behind him did not roar. It screamed, a sound like the world tearing in half. The Comet shot forward, pressing him back into his seat with a force that made his vision tunnel. 100 miles per hour, 200, 400, and then he was airborne. Climbing so fast the earth fell away like a stone. Climbing so fast his body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Climbing into the blue German sky that was no longer Germany's, that belonged now to the Americans with their endless bombers and their endless fuel and their endless everything. 3 minutes. He was at 20,000 feet. The B-17 bombers were ahead, black dots against the clouds. Klaus armed his cannons, 30-millimeter rounds. 2 of them hitting a bomber meant fire, meant falling, meant young American boys burning just like young German boys burned. He closed the distance, 600 miles per hour. The bombers could not outrun him, could not outclimb him, could only pray their gunners were fast enough. They were not. Klaus opened fire. The Comet shuddered. Shells tore through the sky. One bomber's wing erupted in flame. It rolled left, trailing black smoke. Klaus felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt. Just the mechanical awareness that he had hit his target, and now he had 6 minutes of fuel left. Hans's voice on the radio. "Klaus, I am hit. The fuel. Oh God, the fuel, it is leaking. I can smell it, Klaus. I can smell it." Klaus twisted in his seat, searched the sky, found Hans's Comet trailing green vapor. The T-Stoff, leaking. And when T-Stoff leaked, it did not just burn, it ate. Metal, rubber, flesh. Hans eject, Klaus screamed into his radio. "Eject now," cannot Hans said. His voice very calm, very distant. "Canopy is jammed. The fuel is on my legs, Klaus. I can feel it. Oh God, I can feel it." And then Hans's Comet exploded, not from enemy fire, not from a bullet. From its own fuel consuming itself in a chemical fire so hot, it turned the aircraft into vapor. One moment there was a plane, the next a cloud of green smoke and metal fragments tumbling through empty sky. Klaus's fuel gauge read 4 minutes. He turned for home. No engine power now, just a glide, just the wind and the hope that he could find the runway before gravity found him. Below, Germany spread out like a broken toy. Cities in ruins, roads cratered, the fatherland dying. He aimed for Brandis Airfield, came in low, fast. The Comet had no landing gear, just a skid. You hit the concrete and prayed the angle was right and the fuel tanks held and physics was merciful. Klaus hit hard. The skid shrieked against the runway. Sparks flew. The Comet bounced once, twice, settled, and then Klaus smelled it. The fuel, leaking. He tore at his harness, threw open the canopy, jumped from the cockpit, and ran. Behind him, the Comet sat on the runway like a wounded animal, green vapor rising from its belly. It did not explode. It just sat there, melting itself. The fuel eating through aluminum and steel while Klaus stood 50 meters away and watched his aircraft commit suicide. A jeep pulled up. The commandant stepped out. "Hoffman," he said, "good work. You hit a bomber." "Hans is dead," Klaus said. The words felt heavy in his mouth. "Foreign." The commandant nodded. "He died for Germany, as we all will. Your next mission is tomorrow morning." Klaus looked at him, really looked, at this man in his clean uniform, this man who had never flown a Comet, who had never smelled the fuel, who had never watched his friends dissolve in the sky. They do not care if we live, Klaus thought. We are just ammunition, just bodies to put in these death traps, just numbers on a report. That night, Klaus did not sleep. He sat in the barracks and stared at Hans's empty bunk. At the photos Hans had taped to the wall, his mother, his sister, his daughter, all of them waiting for a man who would never come home, who had been erased from the world by his own government's desperation. At dawn, the commandant ordered Klaus to his Comet. Klaus looked at the rocket plane, at the fuel tanks that could melt him, at the 8-minute timer that was his entire life expectancy. He turned and walked away. Hoffman, the commandant, shouted, "That is desertion. That is treason." Klaus kept walking. They caught him 3 days later in the woods outside Leipzig. American soldiers, big men with rifles and hard eyes. Klaus raised his hands, surrendered in English he had learned from propaganda films. "I am pilot," he said. "Luftwaffe, Me-163. The American sergeant looked at him, at this skinny German kid covered in mud. "You flew the rocket plane?" "Yes." The sergeant whistled. "Jesus Christ, how old are you?" "21. You look 16. They put Klaus in a truck with 20 other German prisoners, drove west, away from the dying Reich, toward the American lines, toward a future Klaus could not imagine. At the processing center, an intelligence officer interviewed him. "Captain Williams," the nameplate said. "A woman." Klaus had never seen a woman in uniform before. "You deserted," she said. "Yes." Why Klaus told her about Hans, about the fuel, about realizing his own government wanted him dead more than the enemy did. Captain Williams made notes, did not judge, finally looked up. "You know what they will do to deserters when Germany surrenders?" "Shoot them," Klaus said. Probably she agreed. "But you are a POW now, under American protection. You go where we send you." "Where?" She smiled. "Texas." Klaus had never heard of Texas. 3 weeks later, he stood on the deck of a transport ship watching the Atlantic roll past. Around him, hundreds of German POWs, men who had fought and lost. Men who had been told America was evil, that Americans tortured prisoners, starved them, worked them to death. A POW next to Klaus spat over the rail. "They will kill us," he said. "All of us. You will see." Klaus said nothing. He had seen enough killing, done by people who called it duty, called it honor, called it anything but what it was. Murder by policy. The ship arrived in New York. Then trains. Long, rattling trains through a country so vast it made Germany look like a garden plot. Through cities untouched by bombs. Through farms heavy with crops. Through a land that had not been burned and broken and bled dry. June 1945. The train stopped in Texas. The heat hit Klaus like a fist. 110 degrees, dry and merciless. Guards herded them off the train into trucks, drove them down dirt roads lined with barbed wire. Camp Hearn, 4,800 German POWs behind fences in the middle of nowhere. Guard towers, barracks, the whole apparatus of imprisonment. Klaus expected brutality, expected cruelty, expected the propaganda to be true. Instead, he saw German prisoners playing soccer, reading in a library, swimming in a pool. He saw clean bunks and full latrines and food. "My God," Klaus whispered, "they lied to us about everything." A guard processed him. Name, rank, unit. Klaus answered mechanically. The guard was young, maybe 21, maybe 22, looked at Klaus with tired eyes that had seen too much. "What did you fly?" the guard asked. His nameplate said Mitchell. "Me 163 Comet," Klaus said. Something crossed Mitchell's face. Recognition. Pain. He laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Rocket plane, huh? I flew the Devastator. We should start a club." Klaus did not understand. "What club?" "Pilots who flew coffins," Mitchell said, and lived. For the first time in months, Klaus felt something that was not grief or fear or rage. He felt understood. This American, this enemy, this guard who looked at him and saw not a German or a Nazi or a prisoner, but a pilot who had been betrayed by the very people he trusted. "Yes," Klaus said quietly. "Exactly." Mitchell stared at him a long moment, then nodded. "Barrack 12. Get settled. Dinner is at 1800. Klaus walked to his assigned barrack. Inside, men were unpacking, speaking German, some praying, some crying, some just sitting in silence. Klaus found his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this camp was a man who understood, an American who had flown his own coffin and survived, who knew what it meant to watch your friend die because your government cared more about budgets than bodies. Klaus closed his eyes. For the first time since Hans died, he thought maybe there was a reason he had survived. Robert Mitchell stood outside the barracks and lit a cigarette. His hands shook. They always shook when he thought about the planes, about Midway, about Tommy 3 years ago. June 4th, 1942. A date burned into his soul like a brand. He had been 18, fresh out of training. Farm boy from Illinois who wanted to fly, who wanted to serve, who believed what they told him about duty and honor and making the world safe. They gave him a TBD Devastator, torpedo bomber, slow as molasses, fragile as glass. Every pilot who flew it knew the truth. This was a plane designed in 1934, obsolete before the war even started. But the Navy had them, had spent money on them, so the Navy used them, and boys died. Robert remembered the briefing, commander standing in front of maps of Midway Atoll. "Gentlemen," he said, "the Japanese fleet is approaching. 4 carriers. You will attack with torpedoes, low and slow, in a plane that maxed out at 115 miles per hour, against Zero fighters that could do 330, against anti-aircraft guns that could track a seagull." It was murder. They all knew it, all knew. But orders were orders. Tommy Reynolds sat next to Robert in the ready room. Best friend since basic training. Tommy who made everyone laugh. Tommy who wrote letters to his mother every single day. Tommy who whispered to Robert before they walked to their planes, "If I do not make it, tell my mom I was not scared." Robert promised. Lied. Because Tommy was terrified. They all were. 12 Devastators launched from the USS Hornet, VT-8. 12 crews, 36 men, flying into hell in aircraft that had no business being in combat. Robert's plane was number 7. Tommy flew number 3. They flew low over the Pacific, 100 feet above the waves. Spray on the windscreens, engines laboring. Every man inside those planes knowing this was probably the last hour of their lives. The Japanese carriers appeared on the horizon. Beautiful ships, deadly ships, and swarming around them like hornets, Zero fighters. The Zeros dove. Robert saw Tommy's Devastator take the first hit. 20-millimeter cannon shells tore through the wing, fuel sprayed. On, then fire. Tommy's plane rolled left, nose dropped, and smashed into the ocean at 200 miles per hour. No parachute, no survivors, just gone. Robert kept flying. Had to. The mission, the duty, the lies they told themselves to keep going. More Devastators fell, burning, breaking apart, splashing into the sea. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the carriers. Black puffs of death stitching the sky. Robert's plane shuddered as bullets punched through aluminum. Instruments shattered. Hydraulics failed. He dropped his torpedo, missed, pulled up hard, looked back. 11 Devastators gone, burning on the water or sinking fast or just vaporized. 11, only Robert's plane limped back to the Hornet. 47 bullet holes, no hydraulics, landing gear stuck. He crashed onto the deck and medics dragged him from the wreckage. "Where is VT-8?" he asked. "Son," the officer said. "You are VT-8. The rest are dead." They started calling him Ghost after that. The pilot who survived what killed 11 others. The man who flew through fire and came back alone. Robert hated the name. It felt like a curse, a reminder that he was alive when he should not be, that he was haunted by the faces of men who would never grow old. Robert spent 3 months in the hospital, not for injuries, for his mind, the nightmares, the screaming, the guilt of living when everyone else burned. Dr. Webb, the Navy psychiatrist, was the only one who understood. "Your guilt is not because you survived," Webb said. "It is because you know it should not have happened." The Navy knew the Devastator was obsolete, Webb explained quietly. Tests in 1940 proved it, but they had already bought them, already spent the money, so they used them anyway. "Your friends did not die in combat," Webb said. "They were murdered by negligence." Robert never forgot those words. They reassigned him, instructor duty, teaching new pilots, keeping him away from combat. In 1945, they sent him to Texas. Guard duty at a POW camp. Safe work, easy work. Work for a broken man who flinched at loud noises and drank himself to sleep. And then Klaus Hoffman walked through his processing line. A German kid who flew a rocket plane, who watched his friend melt, who deserted because he realized his own government was his real enemy. Robert saw himself in those haunted eyes, saw Tommy, saw Hans, saw all the boys fed into machines by men who never had to fly. That night, Robert lay in his bunk and thought about Klaus, about Hans, about Tommy, about all the ghosts that followed them. He was not alone anymore. Across the ocean, in the ruins of Germany, boys were still dying in comets. In America, new pilots were learning to fly planes that cut corners, that prioritized speed over safety. That would kill them because someone decided profit mattered more than people. But here in this Texas camp in the middle of nowhere, two men who had survived the unsurvivable had found each other. And maybe, just maybe, they could make sure it never happened again. Tomorrow would come, and with it the beginning of something neither of them expected. Not friendship, not yet, but understanding. And from understanding, perhaps redemption. The ghosts of Hans and Tommy watched from the shadows, waiting, hoping that their deaths would mean something more than statistics in a forgotten report, that two survivors would carry their memory forward and make sure no more boys climbed into coffins with wings. 3 weeks passed. Klaus and Robert did not speak again. Not officially, not where anyone could see. But they watched each other. Robert would stand at his guard post and see Klaus working the farm detail, hauling irrigation pipes under the Texas sun, shirt soaked with sweat, moving like a machine because work kept the memories away. Klaus would glance up from the tomato fields and see Robert smoking by the fence, always alone, always staring at something no one else could see. Two ghosts pretending to be alive. Then came the bacon. Morning mess hall, June 28, 1945. 200 German POWs lined up with metal trays. The American cooks behind the counter ladling out breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, and bacon. Real bacon. Klaus stood in line and stared. He had not seen bacon in 3 years. In Germany, there was ersatz everything. Fake coffee made from acorns. Fake meat made from sawdust and hope. Bread so hard it could break teeth. And that was for soldiers. Civilians got less. The cook dropped 4 strips onto Klaus's tray. "There you go, Fritz." Klaus carried his tray to a table, sat down, looked at the bacon, glistening with fat, smelling like something from a dream, from before the war, from childhood when the world still made sense. A German POW across from him whispered, "Do not eat it. It is poisoned. They want us to think they are kind. Then they kill us." Klaus picked up a strip, bit into it. The taste exploded in his mouth. Salt and smoke and richness. Real food. Not chemicals, not substitutes. Real. He started crying. Could not help it. Tears running down his face while he chewed bacon in a prison camp in Texas. Crying because Hans would never taste this. Because his mother had starved to death in Hamburg while he flew rocket planes. Because everything they had been told about America, about the war, about sacrifice and duty, and the glorious Reich, all of it had been lies. And the truth tasted like bacon. Robert watched from the guard station by the mess hall door. saw Klaus crying, saw the other Germans staring, saw the exact moment Klaus's worldview shattered. Sarah Patterson, the WAC officer, stood next to Robert. "What is wrong with him?" "He is realizing," Robert said quietly. "Everything he fought for was a lie." "How do you know?" "Because I had the same realization. Just took me longer." Robert walked over to Klaus's table. The other POWs tensed. Guards did not approach during meals unless there was trouble. Robert sat down across from Klaus. First real food in a while. Klaus wiped his eyes, embarrassed, angry. "We had food in Germany." "Sure," Robert said. "Sawdust bread, turnip soup, roasted acorns they called coffee." "I read the reports." Klaus's face crumpled. "Yes." Robert leaned forward. "The Me-163, they gave you better rations than regular soldiers, right? Special food for rocket pilots." Klaus looked up sharply. "How did you know?" "Because that is what they did to us too," Robert said. "Carrier pilots got real meat, real eggs, while infantry ate canned hash. They fed us well so we would not question why we were flying garbage." Klaus stared at him. "You understand," Robert nodded. "June 4th, 1942, Midway, 12 Devastators. We flew 115 miles per hour into Zero fighters doing 330. Navy knew it was suicide. Sent us anyway. 11 died. I watched my best friend burn. Tommy Reynolds, 19 years old. Never even kissed a girl." Klaus's hands trembled. "Hans Weber, Me-163, April 10th. The fuel leaked. Teased off. It ate through the cockpit. He could not eject. I heard him screaming on the radio. Then nothing." They sat in silence. Around them, the mess hall noise faded. Other prisoners eating, guards watching. The ordinary machinery of captivity grinding on. But at this table, two men existed outside of it, in a space where rank and nationality and war did not matter. Only pain mattered. And recognition. Robert pulled something from his pocket, a dog tag, tarnished, worn, Tommy Reynolds, service number. "Blood type, I carry this," Robert said, "to remember. To never forget what they did to him, to us." Klaus reached into his own pocket, pulled out a photograph, creased, faded. Hans Weber in his flight suit, grinning. "I carry this," Klaus said, "for the same reason." They looked at each other across the table, across the war, across the lust and the propaganda and the hatred that had been fed to them like fuel into tanks. And they both knew. The real enemy was never across the battlefield. It was behind the desk, in the office. The men who sent boys to die in planes they knew were coffins. A guard shouted across the hall, "Mitchell regulations." Robert stood. "Tonight, midnight, east fence by the motor pool." Klaus nodded. Robert walked away, left Klaus sitting with his bacon and his tears and his shattered illusions. Sarah caught up with Robert outside. "You are fraternizing with a POW. That is a court-martial." "He is not a POW," Robert said. "He is a pilot. Like me." "Robert, Sarah, that kid flew a rocket plane that could melt him alive. 8 minutes of fuel, one chance to land. His best friend dissolved in front of him. And he is 21 years old. 21. I was 18 at Midway. We are the same. We are exactly the same." Sarah looked at him for a long time. "I could report you, but you will not." "No," she said quietly. "I will not. Because you understand too." Sarah had been a WASP, women Air Force service pilots, ferry duty, flying repaired aircraft from factories to bases, testing planes after maintenance. Dangerous work. 38 WASP pilots died during the war. And when it ended, the government did not even call them veterans, did not give them benefits, did not acknowledge their service. Sarah understood being expendable. Midnight came. Robert walked the perimeter, pretended to patrol, found Klaus waiting by the east fence where the motor pool blocked the guard tower's line of sight. They sat on the ground. Robert offered a flask. Moonshine traded from a Texas farmer who worked the POW labor crews. Robert looked the other way when the man smuggled it in. Some rules were worth breaking. Klaus drank, coughed. "What is this freedom?" Robert said. They passed the flask back and forth. Two men getting drunk under a sky full of stars that belonged to neither Germany nor America, but to the universe that did not care about their little war. "Tell me about the comet," Robert said. Klaus told him everything. The rocket engine that screamed like a dying animal. The fuel gauges counting down your life in minutes. The moment when the engine cut out and you were gliding powerless, hoping you could find the runway before gravity found you. The landing on a skid with no wheels, one bounce, and the fuel tanks could rupture, and then you were burning or melting, or both. 14 of us died in accidents, Klaus said. 14 German pilots killed by our own plane. Only 9 Allied aircraft ever shot down. We killed ourselves more than you killed us. Robert told Klaus about the Devastator, how it was designed in 1934, how tests in 1940 proved it obsolete, how the Navy used them anyway because they had already spent the money, how VT-8 launched from the Hornet knowing they would probably die, how Tommy's plane exploded and Robert flew through the debris, how he landed with 47 bullet holes and the officer told him he was the sole survivor. 80% of Devastator pilots died in combat, Robert said. 80%. Not because of the enemy, because we gave them flying coffins and called it duty. Why do they do it, Klaus asked. Why send us to die? Robert took a long drink. Pride, politics, money. They do not see us as people. Just tools. Just numbers on a spreadsheet. Tommy was not a human being with a mother who loved him. He was Asset 7 in Torpedo Squadron 8. When he died, they just checked a box. Klaus thought of Hans, of the commandant who said good job, one bomber down, while Hans's body was still dissolving in chemical fire. They do not even hate us, Klaus said. That would require seeing us as human. They just use us, the flask emptied. They sat in silence. Above them, the Milky Way blazed. Below, the Texas earth still warm from the day's heat. Between them, understanding. Robert looked at Klaus. You ever fly for joy? Just because you loved it, Klaus smiled sadly. Before the war, my father took me up in a Bücher Jungmann, a trainer, slow and gentle. We flew over Hamburg. I was 12, I thought it was magic. Robert nodded. My uncle had a Stearman, farm duster. He let me take the stick when I was 14. I thought I had found heaven. What happened to it, Klaus asked. The joy they took it from us, Robert said, turned something beautiful into a weapon. Made us afraid of the thing we loved. Can we get it back? I do not know. But Klaus thought maybe they could. Maybe 2 broken pilots could remember what flying felt like before it meant death. The meetings became regular, every few nights. Always midnight, always the east fence. They talked about planes and fear and friends who were gone. They showed each other scars. Klaus had burns on his hands from touching Me-163 fuel. Robert had shrapnel scars from Midway. They compared nightmares. Klaus dreamed of green chemical fire. Robert dreamed of the ocean full of burning men. They began to heal. Not completely, never completely, but enough. In October, Robert did something insane. He borrowed the camp commander's car, told Colonel Morrison he needed to pick up supplies, drove Klaus out to an abandoned airstrip 20 miles from Hearn. In the back seat covered with a tarp, a Stearman biplane. Oh, slow, safe. You are crazy, Klaus said. Probably Robert agreed, but you have not flown since April, since the comet tried to kill you. I think you need to remember that planes do not have to be coffins. They pulled the Stearman from the trailer. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Open cockpit, fabric wings, an engine that purred instead of screamed, a plane designed to teach, not kill. You fly front, Robert said. I will ride back. Klaus climbed into the cockpit. His hands found the controls. Throttle, stick, rudder pedals, all familiar, all terrifying. He started the engine. It coughed to life, gentle, reliable. Nothing like the comet's rocket scream. Take your time, Robert called from the rear cockpit. Klaus taxied to the runway, pushed the throttle forward. The Stearman rolled, picked up speed, lifted into the Texas sky. And Klaus remembered. This was why he learned to fly. Not to kill, not to die, but because there was something holy about leaving the earth, about seeing the world from above, about being free in 3 dimensions while everyone else was trapped in 2. He flew for an hour, loops and rolls and lazy figure eights, Robert whooping in the back seat, both of them laughing like children, like they were 12 and 14 again, before the war, before the death. Before they learned that men would take something pure and turn it into a weapon. Klaus landed, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit crying. But these were different tears. I forgot, he said. I forgot it could be beautiful. Robert climbed out, put a hand on Klaus's shoulder. That is what they took from us. The joy. But we can take it back. They flew back to camp, hid the steerman, never spoke of it to anyone else. It was their secret, their rebellion, their way of saying, no, you do not own us anymore. You do not get to define what flying means. November brought cold weather. Texas cold, which was not German cold, but cold enough. The POWs were issued coats, given extra blankets, treated like human beings instead of animals. Klaus could not reconcile it. Every day the contradictions multiplied. He had been told Americans were monsters, but they fed him bacon, gave him books from the library, let him play soccer, treated his injuries. He had been told the Reich was glorious, but the Reich let his mother starve, sent Hans to burn, built rocket planes that killed their own pilots. One night, drunk on moonshine, Klaus said to Robert, I think I was on the wrong side. Robert shook his head. There were no right sides, just young men dying for old men's mistakes. But America, Klaus gestured around the camp. This, you feed us, house us, treat us like people. We are not perfect, Robert said. We have our own sins. But yes, we believe people matter. Even enemies, maybe especially enemies. Why Robert thought about that? Because we think people can change, can learn, can be better. Your uniform does not define you forever. In Germany, Klaus said quietly, it does. If you are not loyal until death, you are a traitor. Robert looked at him. You deserted? Yes, that took more courage than staying. You chose to live, to question. That is not cowardice, that is strength. Klaus had never thought of it that way. December arrived. Christmas approached. The camp decorated, pine branches, stars made from tin cans. The Germans sang carols, Stille Nacht, Silent Night, the song that had originated in Austria but belonged to the world. Robert stood outside Barrack 12 and listened. The harmonies, the peace, the memory of a holiday that had once meant joy before the war made everything bitter. Sarah found him there. You are thinking about Tommy, always, Robert said. He would want you to move forward, I know. But how? By helping Klaus, by making sure the next generation does not fly coffins. On Christmas Eve, Klaus received a Red Cross letter. His hands shook as he opened it. Robert watched from across the room. Klaus read. His face went white. The letter fell from his fingers. Robert picked it up. Read, Your mother, in Hamburg, malnutrition, October 19, 3 months ago. While Klaus had been eating bacon and turkey and real food in Texas, his mother had been dying of hunger in the ruins of Hamburg. Klaus made a sound like an animal. Rage and grief and guilt compressed into a howl. He put his fist through the barrack wall, blood on his knuckles, tears on his face. I ate, he screamed. I ate while she starved. I am alive, and she is dead. Robert grabbed him, held him while he broke. Sarah came running. Other guards, other POWs, all of them watching this German boy destroy himself with survivor's guilt. Klaus, Robert said, Klaus, listen to me. You could not have known. You could not have saved her. I fought for them, Klaus sobbed. I flew their rocket. I believed their lies, and they let her die. Sarah knelt beside them. Klaus, your mother would not want you to die too. She would want you to live. Klaus looked at her with eyes full of nothing. Why, what is the point? Robert gripped his shoulders. The point is to make sure it does not happen again, to make sure no more mothers lose sons to flying coffins, no more sons lose mothers to politicians' pride. You survived for a reason. Find it. Klaus stared at him. What reason? To be better than they were, Robert said. To choose life over death. To build instead of destroy. Klaus cried until he had no tears left. Then he sat in the barracks staring at nothing. Sarah brought him food. He did not eat. Robert sat with him through the night. Did not speak. Just stayed. At dawn, Klaus finally said, I cannot go back to Germany. Then do not. Robert said, where do I go? Here. Stay here. In America. As what? A prisoner, remember, as a man, as a pilot, and as someone who survived hell and chose to be better. Klaus looked at him. Is that possible? I think so. How Robert smiled tiredly, one day at a time, one flight at a time, one choice at a time. They sat in silence as the sun rose over Texas. Christmas morning, a day of peace, a day of new beginnings. In the following weeks, Robert and Klaus hatched their plan. They would document everything, every design flaw, every corner cut, every instance where profits mattered more than pilots. Klaus had technical drawings of the Mi-163, classified documents he had stolen before deserting, test reports showing the fuel was lethal, landing was suicidal, the whole program was doomed from the start. Robert had Navy reports on the TBD Devastator, memorandums showing commanders knew it was obsolete, knew sending it to Midway was murder, knew and did not care. They laid the documents side by side in the camp library, German and American, different languages, same crime. Look, Klaus said, pointing to a 1943 test. The Mi-163 crashed on landing. The pilot, Lieutenant Meyer, dissolved when the fuel tanks ruptured. They noted it in the report. And then they built 370 more. Robert showed him a 1940 Navy analysis. The TBD is inferior to the Japanese Type 97 torpedo bomber in speed, range, and survivability. Recommendation is immediate replacement. But they kept flying them until Midway. Same pattern, Klaus said. They knew. Both governments knew, and they sent us anyway. Robert nodded. It is not German or American. It is human. The capacity to sacrifice others for your goals and call it patriotism. What do we do with this? Klaus asked. We make sure it never happens again, Robert said. We testify. We write reports. We become so loud they cannot ignore us. They will call us traitors. Probably. You would risk that. For me, Robert looked at Klaus. For Tommy, for Hans, for every pilot who died in a plane that should never have flown. Sarah found them in the library surrounded by documents. What are you two plotting? Revolution, Robert said. She looked at the papers, at the evidence of systematic negligence spanning two nations. Oh my God, will you help us? Robert asked. Sarah thought of the WASP pilots who died, who were not honored, who were forgotten. Yes, she said, I will help. They worked through January, organizing, cross-referencing, building a case that politicians and generals could not dismiss. Colonel Morrison discovered them eventually, called them into his office, looked at their evidence. You are collecting documentation on unsafe military aircraft, he said. Yes, sir, Robert said. Why? Because they killed our friends, sir. Because they will kill more. Because someone has to say stop. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he opened his desk drawer, pulled out his own file. P-38 Lightning. I flew them in Europe. Compressibility and DAWs, controls locked up. 3 times I nearly died. I filed reports. They were ignored. He looked at Klaus. And you, Mi-163. Rocket fuel that ate flesh. 8 minutes to live. Your friend died. Germany did not care. Yes, sir. Morrison pushed the files across his desk. Add mine to yours. And when this war is over, when the politicians are congratulating themselves on victory, you show them this. You show them what their victories cost. Robert and Klaus stared at him. Morrison smiled grimly. I am a soldier. I follow orders. But I am also a pilot, and pilots protect each other. Even across enemy lines, he stood, dismissed. And gentlemen, make them listen. They left his office with Morrison's blessing, with more documents, with hope. Klaus looked at Robert. We can actually do this. We have to, Robert said. For everyone who flew coffins, for everyone who will fly them if we do not speak up. They walked back to the barracks. Brothers now, though no one had said the word, who would spend the rest of their lives making sure young men did not die for old men's pride. The Texas sky stretched overhead, blue and infinite, full of possibilities, full of flight, but this time flight without fear, without death, without the lie that sacrifice was always necessary. This time they would fly free, and they would make sure everyone else could too, May 1946. The war was over. Germany had surrendered. Japan had fallen. The world was trying to remember how to be peaceful. Camp Hearn was closing. 4,800 German POWs stood in formation for the final time, waiting for transport, waiting to go home, waiting to return to a country that no longer existed. Klaus Hoffman stood among them, 22 years old now, a year in Texas, a year of bacon and moonshine and midnight conversations with an American who understood, a year of learning that everything he had been told was a lie. The repatriation officer called names. Each man stepped forward, received papers, boarded trucks bound for ships, bound for Hamburg, where Klaus's mother had starved, where Hans's family waited for a son who would never return, where the ruins of the Reich lay scattered like broken teeth. Hoffman Klaus, the officer called. Klaus did not move. The officer looked up. Hoffman, you are scheduled for transport. Klaus looked at Robert, at Sarah, at Colonel Morrison standing off to the side, at the Texas sky that had become more familiar than any German sky. I am not going, Klaus said. The formation went silent. 4,000 men holding their breath. The officer blinked. Excuse me, I am not going back to Germany, Klaus said louder. I am staying here. You cannot just stay, the officer said. You are a German national, a prisoner of war. You have to be repatriated. Klaus stepped out of formation. I deserted the Luftwaffe. If I return to Germany, I will be executed for cowardice. And even if they do not shoot me, what is there? My family is dead. My city is rubble. My country is occupied. I have nothing. The officer looked helpless. Son, I do not have authority to just let you stay. Then find someone who does, Robert said, walking forward. Mitchell, this is not your concern. The hell it is not, Robert said. This man is a pilot. He survived a rocket plane designed to kill him. He lost his best friend, his mother, everything. And he wants to stay in America, to build instead of destroy, to live instead of die. You are going to tell him no. The officer opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Colonel Morrison. Morrison walked over. Hoffman, you understand what you are asking. You will face discrimination, hatred. People will call you Nazi for the rest of your life. I know Klaus said, you will be alone, an immigrant, a former enemy in a country that just finished fighting your people. I know. Why stay? Klaus looked at Robert, then at Sarah, then back at Morrison. Because here when I cried over bacon, no one laughed. Because Robert saw me as a pilot, not an enemy. Because your country feeds prisoners better than mine fed soldiers. Because I think maybe I can be better here. Can do something that matters. Morrison nodded slowly. I will make some calls. It took 3 months. 3 months of paperwork and appeals and bureaucratic nightmares. 3 months of Klaus living in limbo. Not a prisoner, not a citizen, just a man waiting. Robert and Sarah stayed with him. Sarah used her connections, her WASP credentials, her understanding of how the military worked. Robert testified before immigration boards, swore Klaus was not a threat, was not a Nazi, was a victim of the same system that had killed American pilots. In August 1946, Klaus Hoffman became a conditional immigrant. Work visa, probationary status, one wrong move and he would be deported. But he was staying. Robert's family in Illinois sent a letter. His father, a World War I veteran, wrote in careful script, Son, I do not understand. We fought Germans, they killed my friends. But you survived when so many did not. If this boy helps you live with that, if he helps you heal, then I will accept him. Bring him home for Thanksgiving. Klaus cried reading that letter, an old American farmer who had every reason to hate him offering acceptance. This country, Klaus said, I do not understand it. Neither do I, Robert said. But I am glad it exists. They needed work, needed purpose, needed to turn their pain into something useful. Late one night, sitting on the hood of Morrison's car under a sky full of stars, Robert said, What if we started a flight school? Klaus looked at him. A flight school. We teach people to fly safely. No corners cut, no coffins. Every student survives. We make flying what it should be. Beautiful, not deadly. A German and an American teaching Americans to fly, Klaus said. They will never accept it. Then we make them, Robert said. Sarah, sitting between them, said, I have savings from the WASP. Not much, but enough to lease an airfield. Buy a couple of trainers. You would invest in us, Klaus asked. Sarah smiled. Someone has to make sure you two do not crash and burn. They found an abandoned airstrip outside Austin. Cracked runway, rusted hangar, weeds growing through concrete. But it had potential. Mitchell and Hoffman Aviation Robert painted on the hangar door, S 1947. Klaus stared at the sign, his name, next to an American name. Equal. Partners. It felt like redemption. Their first student was a veteran. Army Air Corps, flew B, 17 missions over Germany, walked into the hangar, saw Klaus, froze. You are German, the veteran said. Yes, Klaus replied. You bombed us, Klaus nodded. And you bombed my city, Hamburg. My mother died there, in the fires. The veteran stared. Then why are you here to make sure no more mothers die, Klaus said, to teach people to fly planes that will not kill them. The veteran thought about that, looked at Robert. You trust him? With my life, Robert said. The veteran extended his hand to Klaus. Teach me. Klaus taught him, patient, thorough. Every pre-flight check explained, every safety procedure drilled, every emergency practiced, until it became instinct. The student soloed in 3 weeks, landed perfectly, climbed out grinning. I did not die, he said. That is the point, Klaus replied. Word spread, more students came. Some walked out when they learned Klaus was German. Some stayed. Slowly the school grew. But the hatred was real. Someone painted swastika on the hangar door. Someone slashed their aircraft tires. Someone sent death threats. Nazi bastard, go home, the letter said. Klaus read them without emotion. Robert wanted to find whoever sent them. Sarah wanted to call the police. Let them hate, Klaus said. I will teach anyway. Why, Sarah asked. Why do you endure it? Because if I leave, they win, Klaus said. Because Tommy and Hans died in coffins with wings, and I survived. I owe them this. I owe them a world where pilots live. In January 1948, Congress held hearings on military aviation safety. Morrison had submitted their documentation. The evidence of negligence. The pattern of government sacrificing pilots for political expediency. Robert was called to testify. He sat before the committee. 15 congressmen, cameras, reporters. The weight of history. State your name, the chairman said. Captain Robert Mitchell, United States Navy, retired. You flew the TBD Devastator at Midway. Yes, sir. Tell us about that. Robert took a breath, opened the folder in front of him. Inside Tommy's dog tag, and a letter from Dr. Webb, the psychiatrist, who first told him the truth in 1942. They were murdered by negligence. Both reminders of why he was here. Sirs, he said, VT-8 was murdered, not by the Japanese, by negligence. He laid out the evidence. The 1940 test showing the Devastator was obsolete. The memos recommending immediate replacement. The decision to use them anyway because the Navy had already spent the money. 11 men died at Midway, Robert said. Tommy Reynolds, Billy Jackson, Jeff Morris. I can name them all. They died because someone decided budget mattered more than lives. That admission of failure was worse than death. The committee shifted uncomfortably. Captain Mitchell, one congressman, said war requires sacrifice. Sacrifice, yes, Robert replied. Murder, no. There is a difference between dying for your country and being killed by it. The room went silent. Then the chairman said, we have another witness, Klaus Hoffman. Klaus walked in, wearing a suit Robert had lent him. German accent thick, eyes steady. Mr. Hoffman, you flew for the Luftwaffe. Yes, sir. You are now a resident of the United States. Yes, sir. Why should we listen to a former enemy? Klaus pulled out his documents. The Me-163 technical reports. The test data showing the fuel was lethal. The landing was suicidal. The whole program was doomed. Because Germany made the same mistakes, Klaus said. We knew the Comet would kill pilots. We built 370 anyway. 14 of us died in accidents. My friend Hans Weber was one. He dissolved in chemical fire because designers chose performance over safety. He laid the German documents next to Robert's American ones. This is not American versus German, Klaus said. This is governments versus pilots. Both sides sacrificed us. Called it war. It was murder. A congressman leaned forward. What do you propose an independent safety commission? Robert said. Aircraft cannot enter service without civilian oversight. No more corners cut, no more coffins. Klaus added, and when pilots die, we investigate honestly. No cover-ups, no blaming the dead. We learn, we improve. The committee deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the chairman said, "We are establishing the Military Aircraft Safety Commission, effective immediately." The gallery erupted. Veterans stood and applauded. Reporters rushed for phones. Robert and Klaus walked out together into the Washington, D.C. sunlight, into a world that might possibly be a little safer. "We did it," Klaus said. "For Tommy," Robert replied. "For Hans. For all of them." In June 1949, Robert received an invitation. The Midway Memorial Dedication. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, all Von 8 survivors invited. "There is only me," Robert told Sarah. "Then you should go," she said. He looked at Klaus. "Come with me." Klaus blinked. "To Midway, to honor the men I fought against, to honor the men who died in coffins," Robert said. "Like Hans, like all of them." They flew to Hawaii, commercial flight. Klaus's first time on an airliner. First time as a passenger instead of a pilot. He watched the crew, noted their procedures, their safety checks, saw the improvements that were starting. Slowly, incrementally. Progress. Pearl Harbor. The memorial stood white against blue water, names carved in marble. VT-8, all 11 names, Tommy Reynolds at the top because he was first to fall. A crowd gathered. Old men now, veterans with gray hair and hard memories. They saw Robert, recognized the sole survivor. They saw Klaus, the German, the enemy. Silence fell like a hammer. Robert spoke first. "This is Klaus Hoffman. He flew Me-163 rocket planes for the Luftwaffe. His best friend died when the fuel dissolved him. His mother starved in Hamburg. He has nothing. But he came here with me to honor our dead, because they deserve better." All of them, an old pilot stepping forward. "Commander Reynolds, Tommy's uncle. I remember you, Mitchell. You brought my nephew's dog tag home." Robert pulled it from his pocket. Worn, tarnished, carried for 7 years. "I am sorry," Robert said. "I am so sorry." Commander Reynolds took the tag, held it, looked at Klaus. "You lost someone too," my friend Hans, Klaus said quietly. April 1945. Me-163. The plane killed him. How old was he? 20. Tommy was 19. They stood in silence. Then Commander Reynolds did something extraordinary. He embraced Klaus. This old American officer holding a young German pilot while the Pacific wind blew around them. "Our boys died for nothing," Reynolds whispered. "Died in planes that should not have flown. But you two, you are making sure it does not happen again. Thank you." Other veterans came forward, shook Klaus's hand, thanked him, accepted him. Not because he was German or American or anything but a survivor trying to honor the dead. At the memorial, Robert placed flowers, white roses, one for each name. Klaus stood beside him, whispered, "Tommy, Hans, all of you, we remember." The ceremony ended. They flew back to Texas, back to the flight school, back to teaching students to fly safely. Time passed, seasons turned, students graduated, 0 fatalities. Every single one alive. Thanksgiving 1947. Robert brought Klaus to Illinois. His father shook Klaus's hand on the porch, stiff, formal. But by the end of the weekend, the old man was teaching Klaus how to drive a tractor. Some wounds heal with time and corn whiskey. In 1950, Klaus became an American citizen. Naturalized, took the oath with his hand on a Bible and tears in his eyes. Sarah and Robert beside him. Witnesses, friends, family. Robert married Sarah in 1951. Small ceremony. Klaus was best man. When the priest said, "Does anyone object?" Klaus joked, "Yes, I object that it took him this long." Everyone laughed, even the veterans who had once hated him. Sarah became pregnant, a daughter. They named her Emily. Klaus became godfather. Life continued, beautiful and ordinary, and everything the war had tried to destroy. May 1951. Mitchell and Hoffman, aviation 5th anniversary. They restored an old TBD Devastator, found it in a Navy warehouse, rebuilt it with loving care. Not to fly bomb, but to remember. They placed it in the hangar next to a Me-163 Comet that Klaus had located through German contacts. 2 coffins, side by side. A plaque between them read, "To those who flew coffins, Tommy Reynolds, Hans Weber, and all pilots lost to negligence. They did not die for their countries. They died despite them." The ceremony drew 200 people, students, veterans, families of the dead. Klaus spoke, his English better now, his accent softening. "I came to America as an enemy," he said, "as a prisoner, as a man with nothing. Robert Mitchell saw me not as German, but as a pilot, as someone who understood pain. He gave me a chance when I deserved none. Together we built something, not just a school, but a promise, that no more boys will die in flying coffins, that safety matters more than pride, that people can change." Robert added, "Klaus and I were enemies. Now we are brothers, not by blood, by sky, by shared loss, by the belief that we owe the dead our best effort. Tommy and Hans and all the others, they deserve better. We give them that. Every student who survives is our tribute." The death threats had stopped after 6 months. Robert never found out who sent them. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they saw Klaus was not leaving. Maybe watching a German teach American boys to fly safely changed their minds. Robert liked to think it was the last one. After the ceremony, Robert and Klaus took the restored Stearman up. The safe plane, the gentle plane, the one that taught instead of killed. They flew over Texas, over Camp Hearn where they had met, over Austin where they built their school, over the endless blue sky that belonged to everyone. Ghost Klaus said over the intercom, "Do you ever think about what we survived?" "Every day," Robert replied, "but I also think about what we built. We turned coffins into classrooms. We turned enemies into brothers. They flew in silence, the sun setting, the world golden beneath them. This is what flying should be," Klaus said. "Beautiful, peaceful, free." "Yes," Robert agreed. They landed as the stars came out. Sarah waited with baby Emily, Klaus's goddaughter, the next generation. Emily reached for Klaus. He held her carefully. This tiny human who would grow up in a world a little safer because two broken men chose to build instead of destroy. "Your daddies are crazy," Sarah told Emily. Emily gurgled. Both men smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," Robert said. "Both of us." Years would pass. Mitchell and Hoffman Aviation would train over 5,000 pilots. 0 fatalities. A perfect record built on the graves of those who came before. Klaus would fly civilian aircraft for 40 years. Never in combat again. Never in fear. Always in joy. Robert would advocate for pilot safety until his death in 1995. The commission they started would save an estimated 400 lives through policy changes. But that night in 1951, they did not know the future. They only knew they had survived, had found each other, had turned pain into purpose. Klaus looked up at the stars, thought of Hans watching from somewhere, thought of Tommy beside him, thought of all the pilots who never got to grow old. "We did it," he whispered. "We remembered you. We made it mean something." Robert stood beside him, held Sarah, watched Emily sleep, felt the Texas wind that smelled like hope. "This is what we fought for," Robert said. "Not the war, not the killing, but this family, peace, a future where children do not have to climb into coffins with wings." Klaus nodded. "Yes, this." They stood together as the night deepened. Former enemies who had flown machines designed to murder them, who had survived against all odds, who had found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful. The epilogue of their story stretched ahead. Decades of teaching, of living, of proving that people can change, that enemies can become brothers, that the worst of war can produce the best of peace. But the heart of their story was this moment, this night, this choice to remember the dead by protecting the living. Klaus Hoffman and Robert Mitchell, enemy and American, pilot and pilot, brothers in the sky. The hangar lights glowed behind them. Inside the TBD Devastator and the ME-163, Comet stood silent, monuments to those who flew coffins. Outside, the Stearman waited, ready to teach tomorrow's students, ready to show them that flying does not have to mean death, ready to prove that two broken men were right, that the real enemy was never the man across the battlefield, but the one behind the desk who sent boys to die and called it duty. That legacy would outlive them, would save lives they would never meet, would echo through aviation history as the moment when pilots said enough. No more coffins, no more lies, no more sacrifice without reason, just flight, pure and simple and safe, the way it was always meant to be. The stars turned overhead, indifferent, eternal, witnesses to human folly and human redemption. And two men who had flown through hell stood beneath them and chose hope. For Tommy, for Hans, for Emily and all the children who would inherit the sky. For everyone who ever climbed into a cockpit and deserved to come home alive. This was their promise. This was their legacy. This was their truth. And it would endure.